media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition Around the Round Table. We have Penna, Dexter, and Dr. Merrill Matthews. We have a lot to cover today. Let me just mention in the next hour, we're going to be talking with Courtney Balaker, and she is the writer and producer of a film entitled Little Pink House. It has to do with the Kelo decision. And Penna, Dexter, you and I remember when we were actually in another studio, but around the same desk, talking about the Supreme Court decision on that. So we're going to have a chance to talk to her.
That was the decision about eminent domain.
Yes.
And I think, you can go across the political spectrum with that one. People were upset that someone's house could be taken, and not necessarily for a road or infrastructure, but for business development.
For Pfizer.
Yeah.
Of all things.
So, and it's, we'll have to ask her what has been the outcome of Suzanne's property, but her house was torn down. And it's a sad story in a sense, and instead of a sad precedent.
Yeah, Suzette Kelo, and we'll be talking with Courtney Balaker. Of course, Dr. Merrill Matthews with us as well. And yesterday we just mentioned in passing, but I thought I'd get your comments for just a minute about this high school student at Cedarville High School. We have a video captured of him getting angry with his physics teacher because he took his phone and knocks all the paper on the floor, and then says a swear word or two, and then looks like he's almost going to attack the teacher. And it just reminded me, Penna, of something that you've written about, and that is the Promise program. Now, it's not that Cedar Hill High School has that, but in Florida, we've learned a lot. Matter of fact, Senator Marco Rubio's learned that some even lied about the fact that that shooter down there was part of it. But it was an attempt to try to prevent the school to prison pipeline. And I appreciate the fact that sometimes we try to do anything we can to make sure that the police are not called when there's an attack on campus or there's vandalism. But there still needs to be some kind of disciplinary action, and Cedar Hill High School says they're going to engage in some kind of disciplinary action, but I kind of wonder what it is when you have the physics teacher saying he was really unhappy the video got out in the first place. Yeah,
he said a classroom is a place for growth. When I first heard this story, and I don't know how you guys first heard it, but I just heard it on a radio, and a local host was discussing it and really actually lauding the teacher for the grace that he showed for this young man, because he knocked some papers off. I guess it was over a cell phone. Mm-hmm. You're not supposed to have cell phone out in the class. Teacher confiscated it, put it on the desk. The kid comes up, knocks the papers out, curses, and then looks like he's going to choke the teacher. And so somebody took a picture of it in the class. They took a video of it, and it got out, and the teacher wished it hadn't. Apparently this teacher had been working with the young man throughout the year, so he wanted to offer the grace, and he says a classroom is a place for growth. And I get that. That's nice that he's working with him, but I think there has to be some lines, especially in front of other students, of behavior that's acceptable and behavior that's not acceptable, and that's not. And so the Promise program, we discussed this right after the Parkland, Florida shootings, because it was uncovered that Broward County, Florida was one of the premier school districts that implemented this program, and Obama administration sort of pushed it out through the Department of Education all over the country. Some schools used it more than others. But what it does is it's supposed to break the school to prison pipeline, go easy on kids that are acting out, try to deal with it a different way, don't suspend them as quickly, and certainly don't arrest them, especially if they're minorities. And so this was the program. And we can, what happened in Broward County was a result of that, a lot of people have said, because this was a young man with a Hispanic last name, and he had had something like 45 reported violations, and just rudeness to students, threats, saying he was going to shoot up a school, and all of that was let go. He was never suspended or expelled or anything. And so that attitude, I don't know what Cedar Hill High School's status is with the Promise program, but I think it it's just a signal of an attitude that we've had with schools. And it's an attitude, they try things sometimes in the schools to see what works. This doesn't work. We need a little bit of discipline in the schools. I think that teachers can't teach if there's not good discipline and rules that people know that what their expectations are. So in this sense, I have to say, well, great that you had a lot of grace. Teacher, I guess his name is Mr. Savage. But there have to be some lines, and that kid crossed a line.
Well, and again, I'd love to talk to Dr. Merrill Matthews, because you've been a professor in the schools, in colleges, and other things. And so if a teacher or a professor ever had a student do that, I don't know. What would be your reaction?
I was never confronted with that. I would just look too mean for him. I did not have that problem. But, it's interesting because a little while back I was talking to a lady. She's retired now from the teaching. She was in public school.
Right.
She taught in one of the special schools that they put kids in who had disciplinary problems.
Right.
And she said to me, a lot of the kids who are in there want to be there. They need structure in their lives because they don't have any at home.
Mm-hmm.
And she mentioned a particular kid who the school system kept trying to mainstream him and put him back into the regular public school. And he would go and do some attacks and other things. She said he did that, and he would tell me, just so he could get back into the more structured element where she had the kids that had problems, because he said, I get here and I finally actually have some structure in my life. I don't have the ability to be able to live in a place there's not structure because I have none at home. It was a very interesting story that she told.
Yes. Well, again, I just thought if any of you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to move on in just a minute, but I just was struck by the fact that if you go to our website, Penna Dexter, of course, does her commentaries each week, and one of those was on the Promise program. This is not the same, but it just got me thinking about the fact that if this had happened in my high school, I mentioned yesterday that both in my world history class, the teacher there was one of my basketball coaches. He was the varsity coach and the freshman coach. And then in my American history class was my JV coach. I can't even imagine somebody doing that to one of those coaches, but I can imagine what they would do next. And that is, you would be in a headlock, you would be marched down to the principal's office, and that would be it. And if they didn't hit you back in the first place, there's just, and I can remember a time, even in grade school, where we used to have paddles. Again, I can't even imagine that now. Now, if this teacher had reacted that way, instead of the accolades, probably have a lawsuit. So it does seem to me like some things have turned around a little bit, don't you think?
It does, and we'll see what happens here, but it strikes me that in some districts, the teacher might be the one facing the disciplinary action rather than the kid.
Yeah, and that's why I suggested that possibility. So nothing else, again, no criticism at all of the physics teacher. He showed a level of restraint that I'm not sure I would have shown after you throw all my papers on the desk and nearly come at me. But at the same time, I am just hoping that whether it's Cedar Hill High School or other schools, they recognize the importance of discipline, and even more so in light of the articles, Penna, that you and I have written for the issue this month on the Me Too movement. Those are sexual harassment, but there's another issue, and that is, physical abuse. And, once you cut across the line and are willing to go after your teacher, will it make it that much easier for him or even some other student in the class that saw it to come at the teacher again? Let's hope not. But just some thoughts that I thought I'd mention. When we get back, we've got a lot of other issues to cover. And matter of fact, a lot of those are posted on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Internal Revenue Service allows ministers and other religious leaders to take a housing allowance exemption, but that has now been threatened by a ruling by a federal district court judge. Her decision is currently on hold and has been appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The Alliance Defending Freedom brief argues that the housing allowance provided to ministers does not transfer public monies to ministers or houses of worship, and nor does it result in any administrative or financial relationship between the government and religion. Therefore, it is a permissible accommodation of religion and is consistent with this country's practice of exempting churches and other religious organizations from government-imposed tax burdens. It is worth noting that the housing allowance exemption actually predates the IRS code. Originally, it was provided for employees who had to live in a particular location in order to do their jobs, people like ranch hands, innkeepers, and military personnel. Hiram Sasser of First Liberty Institute asked, why would anyone ban rabbis, imams, pastors, and other religious leaders from a decades-old housing exemption simply because they're religious? Ken Kuklowski, also of First Liberty, reminds us that the parsonage exemption mirrors other housing allowances for teachers, first responders, and military personnel who must live in the community they serve. Many pastors already pay both the employee and employer taxes on Social Security and Medicare on their housing allowance. Removing the housing allowance without considering the self-employment tax issue would put ministers at a disadvantage in their tax burden. The IRS code, therefore, is a permissible accommodation of religion because it lifts the governmentally imposed tax burdens on ministers and other religious leaders. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition around the round table today. We have Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. Might just mention that we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about building this wall. And one of the articles we've posted is President Trump's border wall an outdated, ineffective strategy, because after all, you've had people like Chuck Schumer, who is the Senate Democratic leader, saying, if a wall, they can just tunnel under it. I want to say, Senator Schumer, have you seen the wall that they're talking about here? One of the ones that actually was implemented just 2 days ago on Wednesday, the federal government is replacing a section of the border wall near San Diego, Calexico. Now, it doesn't say this in the Associated Press article, but I found it somewhere else, that why did he choose that section? Obviously, it needed to be redone, but it turns out that the county supervisors there are not necessarily fans of Governor Jerry Brown and have decided that they, as a group, actually voted to actually join with President Trump in his challenge of sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. So I think if there is any political reason for why they actually are starting to rework that wall, it may be that. And if you have seen the wall, it is really high, and it's going to be replacing that section in San Diego. And so, Penna Dexter, one of the things I put up here was this article that just said, we hear all these people saying that walls are ineffective, but if you look around the world, they seem to be pretty effective.
The first thing I think of when you tell me about Calexico accepting the wall and that this is where they're going to be building, at least in the near future, is Sacramento's a long way from the Mexican border. This is a long state, and I often look at, what the decrees they hand down, the sanctuary city policies, and how they just dig their heels in on that. And, this, I just can't think of any way that this can be good for the state of California. But they make those decisions because there's so many of them are so far to the left. But when you have to live in it, and you live in Calexico, California, I mean, it's just a matter of security and safety, and I'm sure they're happy to get the wall. And this is a great article that you posted at pointofview.net from the stream, because it's very comprehensive. And I think one of the interesting points it makes is that many countries, in fact, since 2010, it lists, I don't know, I'm not going to count them now, 10 or more countries that have erected walls for various reasons because of refugees or different things. And it's not that the wall completely keeps everyone out, but it certainly changes the equation. It's a deterrent factor. Number one, fewer people will even try. And second of all, it funnels people over to a certain entrance where then you can have people posted to check them. So there are a lot of reasons why, even though a wall is not a perfect screen, although those high ones that you're talking about in Calexico may be, but they do a job. They do an important job. And in Israel, they've certainly done a job.
Well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, again, we recognize that there's 1,960-mile border between the United States and Mexico. Can't have a wall everywhere, but there's another reason why maybe they focused on San Diego. Do you see all those individuals in Tijuana that had been making their way from Latin America? So that may be another reason as well.
Indeed, there's maybe several reasons behind doing that. And, of course, California's been giving the president such a hard time that he may want to go there just to say, look what I can do. So it's interesting, but you know what's going on now. Even as we're talking about the wall, there's a movement in the House to try to move immigration reform legislation, especially with the DACA kids. So there's some that are trying to push that forward. Paul Ryan is pushing back on that and saying we need to go with, I believe he wants the Goodlatte bill out there. But there's it's sort of forcing all of this into a discussion, and I'm not sure that we're going to we need immigration reform in the U.S. I'm not sure it's going to happen until the Americans feel safe, and you're going to have to probably have that wall before you can get that really done. One
of my favorite lines is that if you have a water leak in your house, what do? Start mopping up the water, or do you turn off the water? I think everybody knows the answer to that. And if you got people coming across your border trying to solve the problem until you have secure borders is an issue. And on like the third or fourth page, Penna, they've got some great pieces here about once they replaced fencing, for example, in Nogales, Arizona, assaults on Border Patrol declined by 81%. Or how about fencing in urban sections of El Paso? It assisted the agents in being able to execute METs. What are those? Well, those are mission essential tasks. There's just a lot of examples in this, about 15 pages here of documentation, including what happens in places like Israel, you've been there, or Egypt or other places. And, of course, I've been in Hungary where that individual, like Donald Trump, decided to put up a wall. And that made a difference, didn't it?
You know, and the argument, I just think that people are a bit disingenuous when they're arguing because they're talking about people who need work. And, of course, now we're at, almost full employment here. And people are looking for workers. But this article also makes the point that when you look at the statistics and the numbers of criminals that come across the border illegally, it's huge. So most of this is about allowing people in that are either going to tap our welfare system or be criminals. Not everyone, certainly, but enough to make it a problem and make it very expensive. So a wall is just a common sense. It's a common sense project that has to be undertaken, and not just piecemeal. It has to be done and done well. And then we can, as you said, we can move on then to an immigration reform policy.
And that gets back to Dr. Merrill Matthews' comment a minute ago, because in this article they talk about we have 1 million people who come here legally. And you have a lot of people that visit, but about 300,000 every year overstay their visas. So I'm not believing that a wall is the only answer, but certainly a variety of other kinds of things being considered right now by Congress are some solutions as well, aren't they?
They are. One of the things that isn't being considered that I wish they was, it was mentioned to me by a friend who's an immigration attorney. He said, you got about 40% of the people who are here on visas overstay their visas, and we lose them. We don't know where they are. They don't. So that's a good portion of the illegal population here. He suggested they need to buy a bond, a private sector bond, just as people who go in jail do, and they want to come out because the private sector company that sold them that bond and may have to pay $25,000 or $50,000 we'll keep track of those people. They can find them and put them up and say, here. So it's a way to try to, that's a private sector solution to address a pretty significant part of this problem.
Yeah. Okay. Let me put one more on the table. E-Verify. Now, what about that? Because that seems to me to say that if a person either comes here illegally, crosses a border, overstays a visa, as soon as they go and try to get a job, wouldn't E-Verify address that issue?
It should address it. Now, I've heard people tell me that it doesn't work very well. Okay. And given the government's ability with technology, I don't find that hard to believe.
Okay.
Having said that, they need to have something that works very well there, and then you'd be able to address that problem.
Well, maybe. I mean, yeah, we all know that there are issues with the government's handling of technology, but we could certainly shore it up. I mean, if they're going to spend money, that would be money well spent.
Right. Yes.
And I would argue that many of these people are paying coyotes $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 to get across, to bring them up and get them across. If you were to put that to a company that's managing this, we're charging $5,000 for you to come in to be a worker here, and we're going to keep track of you, but you're paying that money to either a company or the government or in a tax or something. So it's not going to coyotes, it's going to somebody who can use that to help offset costs that they might incur and other things. There's a lot of possibilities out there, and we just don't seem to look at any of them.
No. Well, that's what we need. Well, again, Penna, you said that you thought this article was really good. Let me hold this up for just a minute, because I was just in Hungary, and matter of fact, next year they want me to come back. But here are all the migrants going into Hungary. Then they put up a wall, and what do you see? Just a flat line. Wow. Just an unbelievable flat line. Most of us matter of fact, all of us around the table have been to Israel. Okay, Israel, coming from Egypt, then, again, I think anybody that looks at statistics has never seen anything so dramatic other than to, again, recognize, or, of course, the Palestinians ones. We've talked about that. These are Israeli citizens killed by Palestinians, and you can see the impact as well. It makes it more difficult, not impossible. Some people still could have the will, but makes it more almost as difficult as it possibly can for individuals who come across either illegally to do some harm or just illegally to find a job.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the only factor, but it's not a coincidence that in all these situations, the problem has gone to almost nil because as soon as the wall has been erected.
Well, let me just mention, we're going to take a break. We'll come back and get into some other issues. I have yet to have the roundtable talk about the Iran deal and what that means and where we go from there. But I just thought I'd mention this because no doubt you've been involved in a discussion. Maybe it's at Starbucks. Maybe it's around the dinner table. Maybe it's on Facebook or Twitter where somebody says, we're spending all this money on a wall and it doesn't even work because, if the wall is this high, well, the ladder just needs a little bit higher, or they can dig under the wall, or, all sorts of things. This is, I think, one of the better pieces I've seen to remind us that, as you mentioned, Penna, all sorts of countries around the world since 2010 have used walls, fortified them, expanded them, and it's made a difference. So let's take a break. It's a great resource for you, and it's on our website, pointofview.net. We'll talk about the Iran nuclear deal right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Again, we also encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find one of the articles we just mentioned on border wall security, but another one is The Iranian Deal is Dead, Now What? By David French, who was in studio with us just a couple of weeks ago. And Penna Dexter is here as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. First of all, of course, what he says in the piece, I agree with. Withdrawing from this deal is the easy part. It's the one that you get accolades for. But what next? First of all, is there a reason that we should pull out of the Iranian nuclear deal? Any reasons for that?
Yeah, there's several reasons. One of the reasons is that, Netanyahu came and kind of laid it all out the week before, talking about how, in some senses, they're still trying to develop their program in ways that they can. Not that they've really violated it, that we could pinpoint right now, but at the end of 8 years, they are going to be at a point, from what he says and the way it looks, that they would just be able to start their nuclear program very quickly. And so it wasn't a smart move on our part in the first place. Iran has not diverted they got some money that apparently was theirs, about $150 billion, I think. And they didn't put that anywhere toward their country's economy. They probably put it into the nuclear program. We don't know where it went. That's another reason.
Yes.
They've tended to continue to be proxy fighters for our enemies in many areas of the world, including Syria. They pose a danger to Israel. They're belligerent in that sense. And so we've also increased our relationship with other Arab countries like Saudi Arabia,
right,
who see them as a huge threat. They've also cooperated with North Korea, who's the other big problem actor in the world. I mean, there's a few other things. Also, it did nothing about their missile. There was nothing even in the deal about their missile production program. That's a problem. And it wasn't a treaty. It wasn't accepted by the Congress. It would have never been ratified or approved by the United States Senate. It was really an agreement that President Obama and John Kerry and others made. And so it was very simple. It may be controversial, but it was very simple for President Trump to pull out because it was not done through official channels, in a sense, or the channels that would be democratic, let's say.
And again, he also said he was going to do this. He referred to it as horrible because it was candidate Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, and now President Donald Trump. When people say, I can't believe he did it, well, Dr. Merrill Matthews, he said he was going to, right?
And of course, Penna says it wasn't a treaty, and that's the way Barack Obama treated it because he couldn't get it through the Senate. But I would argue it's a multinational treaty with several countries that we spent money on. So I would argue it was a treaty and needed to go through the Senate to be ratified because he did not do that. They went through a kind of a process where they were going to have a vote, but they couldn't get the votes either to kill it or to approve it, so they didn't do anything. So just on constitutional grounds and to show future presidents, if you're going to be engaging in these multinational treaties, you need to do it in a way that can gain Senate approval, or you don't do it. That's just the Constitution. Secondly, we did send him money. Remember, there was the sneaky part of this.
Yes.
And this is where for me, it raised so many questions. They did this. Rumors came up that there's a secret side agreement. The White House said, Josh Earnest, absolutely not. We don't do side agreements until it was shown that they did side agreements. And this was just a non-disclosed agreement among us. But in fact, that turned out to be 2 or 3 of those non-disclosed agreements. Even though the agreement that he had with the Senate said, we will let you know everything that's going on, they didn't do that. And then you had Penna mentioned it, we started shipping them money, $400 million the first time in cash of other currencies on unmarked planes as it lands in Iran, and they release the hostages right after they do that. Well, weren't you going to tell us about those things? Well, this wasn't cash for hostages. Looks an awful lot like cash for hostages.
Yeah, it lands in Tehran, and the people in Tehran take off.
They even delayed.
They waited. Yes,
they delayed the release of them until the plane landed.
So you're talking about the secret side agreements. The secret on that regard. Well, how about secrets on the Iranian side? Because what they said is we will allow UN inspectors to inspect these places where we are producing nuclear fissionable material, but we will not allow inspectors in the military sites. Now, I don't know, but if you had kids and they said I want to inspect your room, you can inspect this room, but you can't inspect the closet. Or if you're in law enforcement and they say, okay, I've got a warrant to check your house, well, you can check all these bedrooms, but not that bedroom. Where do you think the problem is?
And it's worse than that. Iran said, we'll take the soil samples and send it to the Atomic Energy Agency.
You just cannot make some of this up.
And Barack Obama defended this with a straight face.
Yes, the kinds of things that were necessary in order to get something that looked like a treaty that wasn't a treaty, an Iran nuclear deal. And by the way, you are going to hear people saying, well, wait a minute, this is a treaty. How is it that the president, that is Donald Trump, can actually revoke a treaty because it isn't a treaty in the first place?
In fact, they called it an executive action.
Yes, they did.
And you can do executive actions, but executive actions historically are meant to be, we've got a treaty over here, and there needs to be a clarification or a tweak or an adjustment, something like that. So you can tweak these things a little bit. This is a treaty, and so they didn't pass it.
So we should say it is a treaty, but it's not a treaty that was ever even presented for ratification.
Exactly.
It was never really called a treaty officially, which makes it worse.
Right.
It really makes it worse. So one of the ways that it was talked up when this was being negotiated was that the Iranian people are suffering, and you have placed all these sanctions on Iran and dealing with Iran, and for European companies and our companies to deal with them. And so this is going to help the Iranian people. Well, it hasn't helped them. I mean, they have protests. They have all kinds of counter-terrorism and counter-terrorists in the country. It hasn't helped the country. So that's not a good reason to continue this. And I think you still have people arguing that. It's already been implemented in a sense. I think yesterday we slapped some sanctions back on.
Yes, we did. Mm-hmm.
And we are also asking European countries, actually we're saying if you deal with the Bank of Iran, I think it is, the Central Bank of Iran, then we're not going to deal with you. So that's pretty tough because that Central Bank of Iran is where the Revolutionary Guard and the Iranian military deals with and gets its financing. And so we've already started implementing the pullout.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say the criticisms of him pulling out have been deafening, both from other countries, diplomats in other places, the media, and so forth. I'm going to go out on a ledge here, and I'm going to say I bet almost all of that is going to be wrong. I mean, they were saying this is going to drive Iran closer to China. China's going to buy more of Iranian oil and so forth. I'd be willing to bet none of that happens.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, some people thought that oil stocks are going to go up even more in that time. And when we come back from the break, I do want to talk about some of the things in David French's article, because the question is, what next? But I think it is important, even as we're talking about this Iranian deal, to recognize, as I said, that there were all sorts of secret negotiations. There were all sorts of information that wasn't adequately vetted. Then, of course, you have, and we'll be talking a little bit more about Israel later, but Benjamin Netanyahu kind of blowing the whistle on all of that. Mm-hmm. So those were all very important issues to be somewhat skeptical about the treaty that isn't a treaty. But if nothing else, I just wanted to kind of put some of that on the table and get us thinking about what the next steps are. And if you go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll find them, because he's talking about a couple of things in terms of how to address those. But since I only got a minute, let me mention what Penna did talk about. The real question also is going to be, how will Europe respond to some of this? Because right now, he's saying, that is, the president is saying, you've got anywhere from 90 days to 120 days to also buy into these sanctions. Will euros be flowing into Iran and those kinds of things, or will he be able to keep everybody on board? And so that kind of gets us back to a couple of the ideas that David French have about what we can or can't do in terms of dealing with Iran, and how that particular issue is of concern. And if you want to understand why the Iran deal is such a big issue, well, a little bit later we'll talk about North Korea, because if nothing else, we had 3 individuals that came home. And I got to give the president credit. At 2 in the morning, he could have said, I'll sleep and I'll get him in the morning. But he and Mike Pence meet them at 2 in the morning Eastern time, 1 o'clock our Central time here, and gives a speech. And then Mike Pence, a few hours later, is on some of the talk shows talking about the significance. But if you don't want a nuclear Iran, then you certainly need to pursue some action items. We'll talk about those right after these important messages.
A book banning law has passed the lower chamber of the California legislature. The bill bans more than books. It bans anything that an individual might purchase that expresses Christian Orthodox beliefs about how a person should deal with sexual orientation or gender identity issues. The proposed law treats honest endeavors to alter same-sex attractions as criminal violations of the state's Consumer Fraud Act. California Assembly Bill 2943, now working its way through the California Senate, adds sexual orientation change efforts to a list of banned practices. These include, quote, efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. A payment for products or activities that communicate the biblical position about homosexual behavior would trigger this law. It covers counseling services where the counselor is paid, church conferences where a fee is charged, books and other publications available for purchase, and college or other courses where tuition is paid. The bill could punish religious colleges whose codes of conduct require students to behave according to biblical values about sexuality. The law could punish any entity selling materials or offering teaching or counseling for a fee that presents homosexual practice or transgender identity as wrong or sinful. California loves to pass LGBT-friendly laws that limit the rights of everyone else. But AB 2943 does not protect the rights of LGBT persons. It deprives them of information. Monica Burke wrote in the Daily Signal that the proposed law only limits the number of perspectives and assistance they have access to, while setting a dangerous Orwellian precedent for government-mandated censorship. The LGBT left is pushing this bill that would ban a book or a conference speech that could help a person struggling with same-sex attraction learn how to live a chaste life. It seems this movement that once asked for freedom can't stand it anymore. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. And again, Dr. Matthews is with the Institute for Policy Innovation. We'll talk more about that. And matter of fact, he'll be sitting in this chair a week from this Monday as a host. And I think you will really enjoy some of the conversation he'll have at that time as well. Penna Dexter, one of the things that we have here is a piece by David French, and he had at least 3 suggestions. Actually, you could go through some more, but what do we do now? It's easy to pull out of a treaty or out of a deal, since it's not really a treaty. It's easy to simply say this was a horrible, poorly argued relational kind of deal. It's not very good discussions, diplomacy, or anything else. What do we do for the future?
Well, David French talked about 2 countdowns. One would be the countdown to nuclear weapons that we were kind of just dreading, kind of watching happen. And the other one would be the countdown to democracy. And that's the countdown that we need to move faster now. And we can do that. We have the ability to do that. So he talks about engaging in a new round of dealings with the regime. Now we need to help support the democracy, increase the success for Iran's democracy movement. He said, by no means do we make another deal, because that would abort the democracy movement. We just we need to stay away from deals right now. And perhaps you could set the stage for a much better deal later if you were to do that. And then the sanctions, which I mentioned, and it's already started, reinstituting many sanctions, and then work to curb Iranian influence in Iraq, because all the progress we made in Iraq, and of course now ISIS has been pretty much removed or at least eliminated to a great degree from Iraq, but Iran's in there in many ways, messing things up and stirring things up. So that's another one, and there are others, but. David French, actually, he's an attorney. He was with ADF. He's a writer, but he was also a soldier, and he served in Iraq. And so he really has a good view of this stuff.
And I think one of the things that has been overlooked, as I understood the speech when Trump announced it, was that it seemed to me he drew a red line saying Iran will not be able to get a nuclear weapon. Now, if that's the case, it creates an interesting scenario here, because he's not talking about postponing when you can get it. He said they're not going to be allowed to have that. If Iran continues with this, or they move, now Iran's come up and said we're going to try to continue the deal. We'll just do it with the other signatories of the agreement. But we'll see what happens there. It's a red line. Obama had a red line in Syria. He completely ignored it later.
Yeah.
We'll see if Trump will live by the red line.
Well, it's a good red line to talk about.
Yes.
It will not get that. And again, one of the other points that David French makes is beat Iran in the battlefield not by invading or declaring war, but dealing with these proxy conflicts. And that seems to connect up, Penna, to some of these rockets that launched from Syria into Israel from various Iranian troops. And Israel has a different attitude towards some of their neighbors than sometimes we do, and they came in and, as far as I can tell, did a pretty good job of obliterating that military installation that's kind of been a proxy war that Iran has been involved in.
And I think one of the quotes I loved from the article, by any reasonable measure, Iran has the more to fear from armed confrontation with the U.S. than we have to fear from armed confrontation with Iran. And so it's the idea that you would actually take action. And I think this has been Donald Trump's foreign policy, that he's shown that the United States is not just talk. We're not just bluster. We're willing to take action. And the more so pulling out of this agreement is one way, but another way is to say, listen, we are not averse to military action, and maybe we can show that in different ways in these proxy fights, so that we would not have a military battle in Iran with Iranians. But they need to know that we're willing and that we would, and they need to know that we're strong and we're resolute, and we're not. It's not negotiable whether you get a nuclear weapon ever. So I think that's possible to have that deterrent effect if President Trump continues marching along this kind of foreign policy that he's been developing for our worst enemies around the world.
One of the things I think has Iran has it represents about 5% of the exports of crude oil in the world, and that's where they get a chunk of their money is crude oil exports. So the speculation had been, well, maybe China will take more of their crude oil, except China's in negotiations with the U.S. right now. And one of the things that China buys about $9 billion a year of our crude oil, natural gas liquids, and other things. Maybe one of the parts of that agreement that Trump is going to be involved in to say, we want you to take more of our crude oil and natural gas, and as a stipulation, we want to make sure you don't take any of Iran's. Yeah. You can sort of economically starve Iran if you can keep those exports from going out.
That's for sure. You know, we had Stephen Moore on this week, and he wrote a piece called Goodbye OPEC, in which he said, we're not just moving to a time in which the United States could be energy independent. We're moving to a time because of the Bakken Shale and because of what is happening in the oil patch in West Texas and other places because of fracking to become not just energy independent, but energy dominant. So in some respects, OPEC is less significant, and one of the big players in town is the United States.
That's right.
Who would have guessed?
Amazing.
Yeah. And so, again, that could be something where you could economically starve certainly Iran. And the precedent for that was, remember, Ronald Reagan with the military buildup and how, in some respects, he economically starved the Soviet Union, right?
Right.
Yeah. So those are just a couple of ideas off the top of our head that certainly are significant. And just real before we take a break, this whole idea of a reform movement, I do believe, and again, we don't want to be too critical of our previous president, but we missed an opportunity. There was an attempt to really try to encourage those who bring about reform, because the Iranians really are Persians, and in some respects are pro-Western, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And so it just seems to me that there is some opportunity that never really has been exploited ever since Jimmy Carter and his inscrutable wisdom convinced that we needed to move the Shah of Iran out of Iran. And we saw what we ended up with.
I think it was back in 2009 we had the opportunity to help those sort of people that were rising up. And it's a mixed bag in the Middle East. It always is. It's always very dicey and scary. But I think, the radicals that are in power in Iran, they hold so much sway now, and really there's, I think, that same type of sentiment that existed back then, where you could really take advantage of the younger generation in Iran that wants reform.
Any other comments around the table?
Well, no, it's going to be very interesting, especially if the economic situation in Iran begins to deteriorate again. Yes. It may feed the democracy movement there.
Well, we need to take a break, and when we come back, we will, I hope, have a chance to talk with Courtney Balaker. I know she's running a little bit behind, but we'll get her in studio, and we'll talk about that issue of eminent domain and, of course, the movie, The Little Pink House, which is something you might want to watch. We have a lot more to cover. The first article we've posted today has to do with border security, and if you've always wanted to have some facts and figures on a border wall strategy, there it is. Second one here, the Iran deal is dead. Now what? Have a lot more to cover in terms of Facebook, and we never have talked about North Korea. We'll get into that. Democrats' War on Capitalism, that piece by Larry Elder I thought was kind of interesting, and then so many other articles that we can put on the table. So again, if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things we've discussed this hour, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, just click on that button that says See More. You'll find those articles and those links, and we'll certainly encourage you to print them out, pass them out, hit that share button, put them on your Facebook page or Twitter feed, and start some conversation. Before at the end of the program, we'll also talk about IPI, because that's a great resource as well. We'll do all of that right after these important messages.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition around the round table. Penna, Dexter, as well as Dr. Merrill Matthews. A lot to cover here today, and of course we've had a decision to pull out of the Iranian nuclear deal. We'll get to that a little bit later. We have a number of individuals from North Korea that have told us what it's like to be in the Hermitage Kingdom, the Hermit Kingdom, and so we'll talk about that as well. In just a few minutes, we'll be talking with Courtney Balaker. She is the writer and director and producer of a film called Little Pink House. You might say, what's that all about? Well, it has to do with the Kelo decision, Supreme Court decision on eminent domain. And so we'll be talking with her in studio in just a few minutes as she finds her way to our studio. But Penna, Dexter, one of the things I thought we might talk about real briefly, and it's not something that's just really a grabber, but it affects our pocketbooks, is the budget. And we're in the process right now of trying to figure out if we can ever constrain this monster. Yesterday, I was talking with an individual that actually is running for the governorship in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Probably won't be elected, but he was talking about how big and huge the government is. And earlier in the week, we did quote from Ted Cruz, who was at the NRA convention and had talked about some ways in this one interview with National Review about how you can actually constrain the budget. You can use things like NAFTA. Of course, cutting some of the aspects of Obamacare certainly does a good job. And then, of course, you have various procedural things, and one of those has to do with whether or not you can have reconciliation. But a fourth one, which I wanted to talk about for just a minute, was called rescissions. Explain if you might, to us, and I want to hear Dr. Merrill Matthews' comments on that as well.
Well, you can do it within a certain time period after you pass some sort of a spending bill. And although the rescission that was actually sent, it was sent to Congress. Congress has to vote on it. It was a recommendation by the White House for $15 billion in money that could be pulled back from spending. We won't spend it. It's kind of an easy one in this sense because all the money that the Trump administration was pulling back was unspent money from various other programs that have either expired. For instance, unspent health care money from the CHIP program. It can't be spent now by law because the deadline's passed. Mm-hmm. Green energy funds, those two were the largest share, but there were several other programs. I think Ebola funding for the Ebola crisis. That isn't being spent anymore, things like that. So, but it was a way to say, okay, during a certain period of time, we can pull back some of the money we agreed to spend in the spending bill. And so they're arguing, of course, between the parties over whether that's a good idea or not. But I think in a sense, it's just the idea that, okay, we've had this huge tax cut bill that's doing good for the economy. And then that was followed by an unprecedented omnibus spending bill. So we're getting half of the equation right. But if we don't get the other half right, the spending side of it right, we're in trouble as a country, especially as interest rates rise and our national debt, the interest on the national debt will be a big factor again. So that's the message I think the White House is sending by doing this rescission and also saying this isn't the first one. We want to make some real cuts to some real programs. But then Democrats and even Mitch McConnell are pushing back with some arguments, which we could talk about. But that went to Congress, so we'll see what Congress does with it.
Well, initially, I think they were talking like a much bigger figure, maybe $50 billion. They pared that down to about $12 billion, and they came up with $15 billion. And for a fiscal conservative, I mean, part of me says, yes, this is good. They're going to try to cut this, even though it's not really going into the spending. It's money, as Penna said, that's set aside. On the other hand, as a fiscal conservative, I feel somewhat insulted by this. Because we're coming up to an election, and what they're really wanting to be able to do is to say we spent $1.3 trillion in the budget deal in March, and we know you're angry at that because we didn't cut anything in that. In fact, we gave departments and so forth more than they even asked for.
Yes, we did.
So we want to come up and do this $15 billion rescission so that we can run and say we're trying to cut on this, we're trying to cut back our spending. See, we just cut $15 billion from that.
And pennies on the dollar, right?
Do you think I'm stupid?
And again, for some of our listeners, for just a minute, some of them might say, well, why can't the president just do a line item veto? Because you had in 1996 what was called the Line Item Veto Act. Well, Robert Byrd, who I'm usually do not quote him in a favorable way, but I will in this case, said it's unconstitutional. And if you think about it, that's right, because after all, if the House actually proposes a bill, passes it through committee, it then goes to the Senate, and they pass it as well, and they go to a conference committee and send it to the president. He cannot then just line item remove it. Now, that is allowed in certain states, right, but the Supreme Court ruled that a line item veto is not constitutional. If we got a couple of people around the table that are even older than I am, which we don't, since I'm the oldest one, I guess I get to talk about the fact there was a time when Richard Nixon tried to impound funds. That was not allowed. So rescission's about the only way. But back to the point you're making, Dr. Merrill Matthews, this is not even pennies on the dollar. It's fractions of pennies on the dollar. And to then use that to go back to your constituents and say, see, what a great job we're doing.
And of course, we're not really cutting spending. We're just taking back money that's sitting in bank accounts that can't be used.
Yes.
So it's, you find this from both Republicans and Democrats.
Right.
Republicans talk a good message about cutting spending, but they never seem to live up to that when they get to Washington.
Well, again, you're about ready to vote in some states for your primaries. In other cases, you have already voted, and you will get to vote for individuals in the November election. And I thought this is important to recognize that there are some budgetary tricks that are used to try to convince you that I really am a fiscal conservative when maybe they're not.
So here's what a couple of the Freedom Caucus and Republican Study Committee leaders said about it, because I think they're trying to get on board a little bit. Mark Meadows of Freedom Caucus said, this, I believe, is the first of many rescission packages you'll see.
Well, that's better.
So we'll see. And then, what's his name? Mark Walker. He is with the Republican Study Committee. He's the chairman. And again, he said it was a good first step.
Yes.
But going back to what we mentioned earlier, the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, is reluctant to do this because he said, we've already made an agreement. But in addition, a number of Republican senators who see Democrats in challenging states running for this election don't want to give those Democrats in the Senate the chance to be able to vote for cutting spending because they think that may help their chances, even if it means cutting spending.
Interesting.
Yes. Well, when we come back from the break, we might spend just another minute or two on this, because the traditional way that we learned in school was this, that you have a bill that is proposed in the House, and it goes through the various committees, and there are actually 12 pieces usually that then are voted on independently, and then that goes to the Senate, which is considered as well, and then it comes back in a conference committee, as I've alluded to in just a minute. What we just had, though, is an omnibus spending bill. It's not a budget. Mm-hmm. And as I said when Kelly Shackelford was in here last time, if you did not have a budget and you were before your board of directors, they'd think that you were practicing malfeasance of some sort, or that maybe you needed to get with it. And yet this is something Congress continually does. So we're going to talk about that, because after all, it's your money, and you need to be thinking about this based upon who you vote for in the fall. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Internal Revenue Service allows ministers and other religious leaders to take a housing allowance exemption, but that has now been threatened by a ruling by a federal district court judge. Her decision is currently on hold and has been appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The Alliance Defending Freedom brief argues that the housing allowance provided to ministers does not transfer public monies to ministers or houses of worship, and nor does it result in any administrative or financial relationship between the government and religion. Therefore, it is a permissible accommodation of religion and is consistent with this country's practice of exempting churches and other religious organizations from government-imposed tax burdens. It is worth noting that the housing allowance exemption actually predates the IRS code. Originally, it was provided for employees who had to live in a particular location in order to do their jobs, people like ranch hands, innkeepers, and military personnel. Iron Sasser of First Liberty Institute asked, why would anyone ban rabbis, imams, pastors, and other religious leaders from a decades-old housing exemption simply because they're religious? Ken Kuklowski, also of First Liberty, reminds us that the parsonage exemption mirrors other housing allowances for teachers, first responders, and military personnel who must live in the community they serve. Many pastors already pay both the employee and employer taxes on Social Security and Medicare on their housing allowance. Removing the housing allowance without considering the self-employment tax issue would put ministers at a disadvantage in their tax burden. The IRS code, therefore, is a permissible accommodation of religion because it lifts the governmentally imposed tax burdens on ministers and other religious leaders. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, weekend edition around the round table. Penna, Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews, and we're also going to introduce our guest. Penna, I can go back a number of years. We were in a different studio, same desk. This desk follows us everywhere, but we were in a different studio when you came in and said there has been a Supreme Court decision. It's called the Kelo decision, having to do with the issue of eminent domain. So without a lot of preparation, we spent some time on the air. Don't you remember that? Talking about it and how that didn't make any sense because we usually think of eminent domain for roads or for bridges or things like this. This was used by the Pfizer Corporation to tear down homes. And so we've been sort of following that case for years. And now there's a movie out that relates to all of this.
Yeah, I remember when we reported it, the Supreme Court, in our opinion, made the wrong decision. And I think people all over the political spectrum saw it and were a little bit shocked by it because Kelo was the name of a person, a woman who owned the house, who fought all the way up to the Supreme Court to save her house and ultimately lost it. And so this is the story. Now it's been made into this movie, Little Pink House, and I cannot wait to see it because I know it's going to be compelling. It's certainly a compelling, true story.
And again, we have the trailer on it. We also have an interview that was done with our guest in studio right now, Courtney Balaker, and she is not only the writer, the director, and the producer of the film. So first of all, this is interesting because lots of times people would think of this as a documentary, but you've actually put it in a format where people can follow the story of Suzette Kelo. Tell us more if you might.
Yeah, it's a great point. A lot of people do assume it's a documentary given the topic. I felt it was really important to dramatize the film. So we made a narrative version of this film. Catherine Keener plays Suzette Kilo. Jean Triplehorn is also in the film. And for me, as the director, that was really important because documentaries can be very immersive and effective, absolutely. But for this particular case, this was a 10-year ordeal of this woman's life. She and her neighbors fought the city, fought a big corporation for 10 years. And that's a lot to cram into an hour and a half film. And I really thought that the audience needed to emotionally connect to what this woman and her neighbors went through. And I thought that dramatizing was the best choice to do that.
Courtney, give us a little bit sense of your background. What brought you to being a film producer and director?
Oh, well, I used to direct off-Broadway theater in New York, and that's what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life. But I always fantasized about making films. I've always loved film. I met my husband, Ted Balaker, who's my producing partner for our production company called Courtney Productions. Our motto is making important ideas entertaining, and I wanted to start producing content that I hope will make the world a better place. I used to produce a lot of horror films and some American Pie movies that I knew did not do that. And so that's kind of how I transferred from theater to film. And then when my husband and I started our own company, we only wanted to make work that we felt really passionately about and proud of and can hopefully make a difference.
How did this story get on your radar screen in the first place?
It was brought to our attention that the book, Little Pink House, written by Jeff Benedict, fantastic book, I highly recommend it, that the film and TV rights were available. My husband was very familiar with the case. He followed it. He has more of a journalism background. He used to produce for ABC News. He remembers exactly where he was when the decision came out. As you so very well said, it was a hated decision. I mean, people were shocked. Like 85% of Americans agreed, no matter what side of the aisle they were on, that this was really bad. I was not familiar with the case, read the book, and I was floored, blown away, not only that this could happen in our country and it's considered legal, but by Suzette's fortitude and her strength and this principled stance that she took that not a lot of people could have or maybe would have, but she did it because it was the right thing, and I had to honor that, and I had to make a movie about a human being that would do something like that.
Did you go out then and try to find funding for it, as producers typically do? Did you have to go through the normal process there?
Absolutely. We decided that we wanted to make this independently. We very consciously chose not to partner with a studio because we really wanted to have control over the content. And when you partner with other people, you lose control sometimes. And so it was important to us to tell the truth and more importantly, to tell Suzette's truth. And we just couldn't promise to do that if we were sharing creative control.
When they make dramatic movies, sometimes based upon a true event, they often take a lot of literary license
Yes.
with it. Do you feel like you did that, or is this pretty close to exactly what happened?
It's very close to the book, and the book was very well researched by Jeff Benedict. He's a brilliant journalistic writer. I stuck so closely to the book for that reason. Obviously, you have to dramatize some things, 10-year ordeal crammed into an hour and a half. You're going to have to, condense maybe 3 characters into one person. And changed a lot of names to protect the innocent and the guilty. And, but yeah, there are some licenses that you have to take dramatically to kind of translate something like that into a film.
Did you get to know Suzette Kilo, the woman that fought for her home all those years?
I am proud to call her a very dear friend. One of the first things we did after we decided we wanted to option the rights to make this, we flew to New London, Connecticut, and we sat down with her. And Suzette's not a movie person. She's not into Hollywood. She's not into she doesn't know who any actors are. She never wanted any of this attention, even when the case was going on. She was really the face of this case and the name of the infamous Supreme Court case. She's not into that. She's not into attention. So we sat down, we talked to her, told her how we wanted to make the film. And she gave us complete creative control. She did not want to be involved in the screenplay. We offered. She said, that's not my thing. I kind of understand why, because she's already lived through it once, then wrote, it was a part of the book where she kind of had to relive it. So I didn't want to push it on her, and I didn't want her to relive this horrific thing that happened to her. Since we've made the film, she has been a wonderful partner in helping us promote the film. She's attended many of the screenings with me, done Q&As with me, and people have tears in their eyes after they watch this film and meet this woman who did something so remarkable. They hug her, they thank her for fighting for our rights. And it's been a really wonderful experience with her.
Why don't you take just a minute to give us the basic theme of what's happening here, because people may not remember that
Sure.
or know, and then where she is now.
Absolutely. So Suzette Kilo was a working class EMT living in a town called New London, Connecticut. It was a very blue collar town, economically depressed at the time. She had just left a very bad marriage, raised 5 sons pretty much on her own, and she was ready to start the next chapter of her life. And so she found this dilapidated cottage, fixed it up with her bare hands, painted it pink, and all she wanted to do was come home and look out at the water. And it's hard to find a modest house that she could afford with a water view, but it was rare, it was unique, it was treasure. Well, shortly after that, the city wanted to bring in a multi-billion-dollar company to create stuff that would generate more tax revenue and jobs. And her house was on a parcel of land that they would need for this redevelopment project that was pretty much specifically designed to benefit Pfizer Corporation, who was on the other side of the river, and they were looking to expand. So the city came to her and said, we would like to buy your property. And she said, it's not for sale. And when she said no and her neighbors said no, they said, well, we don't have to buy it. We can use eminent domain to take the land. And that's exactly what they did. Her case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, as you mentioned. She lost, which shocked people across the world. But the outcome that is so remarkable is that because it was such a hated Supreme Court decision, millions of Americans really got to keep their homes because laws were reformed in about 40-odd states so that this type of thing couldn't happen again.
What happened to that land?
I was there 3 weeks ago. So it's been 13 years since this Supreme Court decision. Weeds.
Yeah, that's
Weeds,
my
nothing.
thing. They never actually did anything with it.
Never did anything
And do
with
you
it.
know what's so sad and sick? There is a sign outside of her land, that vacant land. It says Fort Trumbull. That was the name of her neighborhood. Open for new development opportunities. And, that's what happens with these types of things typically. They come in, they kick people out, they say we're going to make everything better, and then a lot of times nothing comes of it. Pfizer left the area, so it's bad. And she ended up leaving the area, too.
We need to take a break, and I'll tell you what, I'll open up the phones in case some of you have some comments about Eminent Domain or about the film. I always give you an assignment when we have a producer or a director in studio, and that is, first of all, we have a link to littlepinkhousemovie.com, okay? Or we also have a link to your producers. Either way, you can find it there. We have the production company linked, and we also have an interview that they did with you, Courtney. But again, go to littlepinkhousemovie.com or just find the link. Click on the trailer. It's about 2 minutes long. I would encourage you, first of all, to watch it. Second of all, then there's a share button there. You can put it on your Facebook page. You can send it by email to a friend. You can put it on your Twitter feed or something like that, and educate a few more people about this issue, and might even start a conversation about eminent domain and the government intrusion. So all of that's available on our website, pointofview.net. And Courtney, what you need is a lot of people to show up to watch the film, right?
That's what we're hoping, and we're in Dallas tonight. We open in theaters April 20th, and we keep rolling out to more and more cities. And I'm here in Dallas right now. We'll be at the Magnolia tonight.
It's a great theater.
Oh, I can't wait. Yeah. And my parents used to live out here, so my mom met me out, so she'll be there tonight too.
Well, again, that's one of the things that we will continue our conversation on. But if you'd like to join us, maybe you have some comments about eminent domain or about governments and all the kind of issues we're talking about right now. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation in our weekend edition with Penna Dexter and also with Dr. Merrill Matthews and Courtney Balaker. And Courtney, of course, is the writer, director, and producer of The Little Pink House. And as you go to littlepinkhousemovie.com, you can click on one of the buttons that says Watch the Movie. And the first premiere, no surprise, April 15th in New London, Connecticut. But you're in Dallas today because you're having a premiere here. But I want to just alert our listeners that you've already had these premieres in New York and California, Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, all the way down. Notice that if people want to actually see Suzette Kilo, our listeners in New Hampshire can go there. You got a composer, Scott McRae, on one in Virginia. These are all places where we have broadcasts. So first of all, just talk for a little bit, Courtney, about what we can do to promote this, because it does seem to me that some of our listeners are saying, I did not know a thing about this movie. I might like to go to it. Can they bring some of their friends or their group discounts? What kind of things are available?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, we're a small independent film and we're up against the big guys. So just like Suzette and her neighbors movement was grassroots, our movie's pretty grassroots. And so we're really depending on people who are passionate about the story, passionate about movies like this to come to the theaters. And the reason that's so important to go to the theaters is because if the theaters see support and interest, then it will only grow and we'll be in more cities and towns. And we want to bring awareness to this issue. We want to honor Suzette's story. And the only way we can do that if people show up in theaters. If you go to our site, as you mentioned, they will see the list of cities. What's great, though, about our distribution model, we're doing a hybrid where we have a traditional theatrical release. But if you do not see your town or your theater on our website, do not worry. You can bring it to your local theater. We're working with Tug to do that. And we have a video on our website that teaches you all about how to do it. Someone on our team, if you sign up for our mailing list, will email you or call you and walk you through how to tug the movie into your local town. What's great about these Tug screenings, too, is you can make an event out of it. You can raise money for your favorite nonprofit. And that's right there, the button when you purchase tickets, you can do that. So these Tug screenings are really taking off. We're getting a lot of interest from people who say, it's not playing here, but I want it to. And you just have to find about, 50 or 60 other people who want to see it too before the theater will, green light the screening. So littlepinkhousemovie.com has all of that information, our lists of cities, and then how to bring it to your town.
I might mention, too, that we have a lot of Tea Party people out there, and if they wanted to make a case against crony capitalism,
yes,
this would be a great fundraiser, don't you think?
Yeah, and, I think it's timely, too, Courtney, because President Trump famously during the campaign talked about eminent domain as positively. He likes it. I think, if you're a builder in New York City, you probably would like it. And, of course, there's the eminent domain that builds infrastructure that pretty much benefits everyone. And even that really wreaks havoc in some people's lives. But this kind that had to do with private businesses and really all the politics involved in it is very sad. But I think it's an issue. It's very timely that you're making the movie now and allowing it to be released. Was that by design or was it just time?
If you had told me, we shot this movie back in 2015. If you had told me on set, yes, that her most famous opponent, Donald Trump, was going to be our president during the release of our film, I would have said, you're nuts. That's never going to happen. So no, there was no way we could have. That was kind of back when people were sort of, Donald Trump, haha. And then, people who didn't, but I know a lot of people loved this idea. But when we were in post-production, it was looking very real. And then he got elected. And then not only, as you say, he literally said, I love the Kelo decision, or I love this type of eminent domain. He's talking about using it to build the border wall. Mm-hmm. And so it's starting to bring its way back into the news cycle. And so I hope you're right that it's timely. And it's, it's something when it comes to a private corporation using it, that's just wrong. That's not what it was intended to do. It was intended to widen roads, build hospitals, something for public use, not for private gain.
It's a good point to bring up because we need to discuss the constitutional aspect of this. We're strong defenders of the Constitution, and the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution says the government shall not take any private property without just compensation. And so my understanding is it wasn't until about 1876 that they really sort of honed in on this and said, okay, we understand this is an eminent domain. The government has the power to do this, but it has to provide just compensation. But then you have the issue of what if somebody says, I'm not selling, I don't want to do that. And so the government has been typically been able to say, okay, this is just compensation. We're going to provide you that to you. And now you've got to give up that property. But as you're pointing out, this wasn't for roads or something that's considered for public use. This is considered for private use, except they tried to make the case this is for taxes, and it sort of skewed the decision a little bit. So even though we're defenders of the Constitution and there is an eminent domain provision in the Constitution, a lot of us didn't feel like this was an appropriate use of that constitutional provision.
Again, I know you weren't trying to be political, but we around this table here already a couple of times today talked about you are right now voting for various individuals in some states in the primaries. And even if you've already voted in the primaries, you're voting for individuals in the general election. And I just think this film might cause a lot of people to ask in town hall meetings or in candidate meetings, what do you think about the Kelo decision? What do you think about eminent domain? And again, if you have a candidate that goes, I don't even know what you're talking about, say, well, there's this film called Little Pink House, and I want you to see it and then tell me what you think about that, because that's another issue, certainly. A couple of the key issues. One is that Suzette really couldn't have done this by herself. There was a legal team that came in, and you talk about that in the film. That's another group that we like to highlight. Talk about them.
Oh, yeah, the Institute for Justice. They are a phenomenal nonprofit law firm. They took her case to the United States Supreme Court. They do not leave people behind. They said to her, we will never leave you alone, and we will never desert you. And to this day, they are still with her. They're a really fascinating organization, too, because they like to play these types of stories out in the court of public opinion. They don't think there's anything wrong with that. And they really do curate their cases because they want to find cases that have human faces that people can relate to. It's very important to them that that anything that they take on has almost like an emotional connection to it. And I think that's really brilliant because, as you see with the Suzette Kelo case, they had to talk her into doing this. She didn't want to be a crusader. She didn't want to be the face of anything. And they said, the only way we're going to bring attention to this on a national stage is if you are. And they did it. You know, and she lost, but boy, did they get everybody to write about this story, and everybody covered it. And it was just absolutely phenomenal what they do.
And as you've said, there have been state laws across the nation that have been passed now to protect people's property rights.
Right. I'll just briefly mention that the American Conservative Union, which does the annual Conservative Political Action Conference in February or March of the year, several years ago, they give a $10,000 award to an average citizen who makes a big difference. Suzette Kelo won it one of those years. I was there at the deal, and so got a chance to meet her.
I didn't know that. Oh, that's phenomenal. Yeah.
Another one that we talked about off air, but I thought we might mention, where did you find a pink house? Because that is not the house that was torn down, obviously.
That was the bane of my existence for about a year. That was one of the trickiest pieces of making this film. It's very hard to find a modest-looking blue-collar house with a water view. That just doesn't really exist in most places. So my husband and I scoured the country looking for this house and didn't find it. And a friend of mine who actually is in the film, Colin Cunningham, he's an actor who's been shooting in Vancouver, British Columbia for a long time. He said, why aren't you looking out there? I said, why would I go to Canada to shoot this movie? So I did. And the very first location I went to was this town called Maple Ridge, which is a very industrial blue-collar town on a river. And there is this little yellow cottage. And I said, that's the house. We have to get it. So thankfully, the woman who owns it let us rent it, let us paint it pink. It was the talk of the neighborhood for a while.
Did you have to paint it yellow again?
No, she actually, she renovated her house. She took the money that she made from the rental and she did some really nice repairs to it.
And she liked the pink color.
She didn't live in the house, obviously. Okay. So we had to move her entire family out. But she had a great time because she just said, my house is the talk of the town. Everybody's talking about it because it was just completely stood out in this sort of drab looking street. But yeah, that was a huge piece to the puzzle. And once we found that, everything started to fall into place.
Right there on the Fraser River. I've been there before. So, yes, that's very interesting.
Goodness, yes.
Went to a school in Vancouver for a short period of time and also spoken at some colleges over at that area as well. Well, if nothing else, Courtney, we encourage our listeners to do what they can to find some of the links that we have on our website, pointofview.net. Go to Little Pink House and get your friends to go as well. So I know you are going to have a busy day here in Dallas with a premiere. Thank you for taking some time to drop into the studio.
Thank you so much for having me.
Penna, that brings us back to a memory many years ago when we first heard about the Kelo decision.
Yes, it does. And just this interview today, I hope that everyone agrees, but it really makes me want to see this movie.
Well, we've made it easy for you to see it and to even watch the trailer. Once again, watch the trailer, put it on your Facebook page, send it out to someone, maybe put it on a Twitter post, start a conversation. We'll be back with more right after this.
A book banning law has passed the lower chamber of the California legislature. The bill bans more than books. It bans anything that an individual might purchase that expresses Christian Orthodox beliefs about how a person should deal with sexual orientation or gender identity issues. The proposed law treats honest endeavors to alter same-sex attractions as criminal violations of the state's Consumer Fraud Act. California Assembly Bill 2943, now working its way through the California Senate, adds sexual orientation change efforts to a list of banned practices. These include, quote, efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. A payment for products or activities that communicate the biblical position about homosexual behavior would trigger this law. It covers counseling services where the counselor is paid, church conferences where a fee is charged, books and other publications available for purchase, and college or other courses where tuition is paid. The bill could punish religious colleges whose codes of conduct require students to behave according to biblical values about sexuality. The law could punish any entity selling materials or offering teaching or counseling for a fee that presents homosexual practice or transgender identity as wrong or sinful. California loves to pass LGBT-friendly laws that limit the rights of everyone else. But AB 2943 does not protect the rights of LGBT persons. It deprives them of information. Monica Burke wrote in the Daily Signal that the proposed law only limits the number of perspectives and assistance they have access to, while setting a dangerous Orwellian precedent for government-mandated censorship. The LGBT left is pushing this bill that would ban a book or a conference speech that could help a person struggling with same-sex attraction learn how to live a chaste life. It seems this movement that once asked for freedom can't stand it anymore. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Had Courtney Balaker in as we talked about the film Little Pink House, but let's get back to some other issues in the news. Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews. One of the articles we've posted here is on the Iran deal. David French wrote about it. The Iran deal is dead. Now what? First of all, Penna, we can certainly say there are some reasons why people were concerned about the Iran deal. It wasn't just the president or Mike Pence or a variety of others. This is not a treaty, first of all, I think we should point out. And second of all, this was a decision, a negotiation that President Trump said was horrible. But why would we want to pull out of a nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, it has a lot to do with just the bad actor that Iran has always been. When you think about the countries in which we have an interest, they're all usually on the other side as sort of these proxy wars. And they haven't dealt honestly with us about their nuclear program ever. We found out just the week before the president pulled out of this deal that from Benjamin Netanyahu, who announced, because of information that the Israelis had uncovered about how there are ways in which they are still proceeding toward a nuclear capability, kind of on the outside of this agreement, but certainly violating the spirit of it, if not the intent of it and the provisions of it. And even according to the deal, within 8 more years from now, because the deal was signed in 2015, it was agreed to in 2015, 10 years from there was no constraint on what they would do going forward. They could just, if they were prepared, they could just bring back their nuclear program within, some people say, months, a very short time. So it wasn't really stopping that. The money, we did transfer money back to them, money that we were holding because of the sanctions. That money, we don't really know what they did with it, but they didn't do it to use it to help their economy. They still have a struggling economy. And so, this wasn't a treaty. Our Congress would have never ratified it. Our Senate would have not ratified it. There was so much opposition to it. There were parts of it that were, as Buddy mentioned, side agreements that we found out later. There was not verification of the military facilities. I mean, I could go on, but it just wasn't a good deal, to use Donald Trump's words. And the President Obama, agreed to it. And as easily as he agreed to it, President Trump had the right to pull us out, and he did.
And, you know, one of the sad legacies of Barack Obama is that I got to the point where I didn't believe you couldn't trust anything the administration said. It might be true, it might be misleading, or it might be false. And I found this in some of the things that we had in the battle over the health care reform. Some of the things that the president was saying at the time, you just knew, if you were involved in this, you knew that's not true or it's misleading. And so even though I was involved in sort of this battle of Iran, you sort of bring that same skepticism, and I think a lot of the public does. So you told us we could keep our doctor and we could keep our health insurance plan, and we see clearly that we can't, and you keep saying it even though we now know that's not right. And now you're telling me this is a great deal on Iran and y'all don't have any side agreements, and lo and behold, we found some side agreements. And it just made, I think it put a sort of a tainting on everything the president does, especially this, because you just couldn't trust him. And when you find out there's these secret agreements, and then the White House spokesperson says there's no secret agreements, until Mike Pompeo comes up and says, well, here it is. Oh, well, that's just an undisclosed agreement. It's not really a secret agreement. You just slap your head and say, I just can't trust you.
Well, and even as this was happening, you had some of the critics saying, no, this was verifiable. This could be verified. And of course, as I've pointed out before, the Iranians themselves said, well, yes, you can verify this in the places where we're producing nuclear fissionable material, but you cannot verify this in the military installations. Well, don't you know what's going on in the military installations?
And you have to give us a 24-hour notice before you can go and inspect various places.
And by the way, we'll take the soil samples.
We'll take the soil samples and send it to you.
This is just incredible. So, Penna, just before we run out of time, one of the things that David French talks about are some actions. Okay, it's easy to pull out of an agreement. It's something you can get some applause for. It's a crowd pleaser, although there's a lot of criticism the president has received. What next? This is the second part. Okay, the Iran deal is dead. Now what?
Yeah, well, the big part of it, of course, is sanctions. And before the Iran deal, we had some heavy sanctions, we and other countries, heavy sanctions on Iran, and it was certainly hurting the country. And so we're now bringing those sanctions back, and it happened quickly, really this week, very, very quickly after we pulled out. So that's one. So that says something. That's concrete activity. But also we have to look at increasing our attention paid to their democracy movement in Iran, because it was kind of like the two movements were going to pass each other. their ability to get a nuclear weapon was supposedly stopped a little bit. And now I think it's let me just read from this. And David French says, it should resist any immediate urge to engage in a new round of deal-making with the jihadist regime, because what that does is it props up the mullahs and the jihadist regime, and it hurts the democracy movements. That's something we now need to encourage now that we have said that we are pulling out of that deal. So, and I wanted to add one thing that was not in the agreement that is kind of important, and some key parts were left out, and that was the missile production.
That's right.
Program, because they were getting certain capabilities, but you have to have the missiles, and they were allowed to continue to work on that. So I think what's going to happen now is we're going to have to rally the European countries, or at least show by example that the best way is not to do business in Iran and not to really, reward them, I guess, for their bad behavior.
One of the other things he says is we should beat Iran on the battlefield, and that sort of connects up to what we've seen over the last couple of days, which 20 rockets make their way from Syria into Israel from what apparently are Iranian forces, and the nation of Israel and the military in Israel decided to fight back real quickly, didn't they?
They absolutely did. And, of course, another aspect, we captured, 5 ISIS leaders this week.
There you go.
And brought them in, and we're making progress in areas in the Middle East.
Yeah, well, I think we are. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a little bit more of this. We've certainly posted one article on the Iran deal, one that we've posted on border wall strategy, because you might have heard some people talking about the fact that they're actually beginning work on one of the walls. This one is over in San Diego. Also posted a piece on Facebook, an anti-conservative bias. You think? Maybe a little bit there. And then also Larry Elder had a piece on the Democrats' war on capitalism. If nothing else, I love that line. There is another reason that Hillary Clinton is convinced that she lost the election. And this one really caught me off guard. Being a capitalist is an untenable position. She said, when I'm in the Iowa caucuses and 41% of Democrats call themselves socialist or self-described socialist, and then I'm asked if I'm a capitalist, and I say yes, maybe that's another reason I lost.
And, of course, the news is not, and that is not that Democrats are moving to socialism. That's true. It's that Hillary thought she's a capitalist.
This is such great stuff. So we have a lot more to cover in this last hour. So if you'd like to join us, feel free at any point. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about the Little Pink House movie that we've talked about border wall strategy, about the Iran deal, Facebook and anti-conservative bias, or this one on Democrats' war on capitalism, we've got a lot on the website. We encourage you to take it and to use it. We'll be back with more right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think you guys, y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us today. And one of the things that we certainly have found ourselves talking about is actually emphasized in the latest Outlook magazine, the Me Too movement. And Penna Dexter has done a very good piece here on Me Too as a mixed bag. And then I also put together some material from the interview that we did a while back with June Hunt on sexual harassment. But it is amazing that every once in a while we put out one of these articles, one of these magazines, and how many times material surfaces that reinforces what has been written there. And one of those is the Attorney General of the state of New York, Dr. Merrill Matthews,
indeed.
Mr. Snatterman. He has been a liberal, progressive. Of course, we got Harvey Weinstein here. And I think Harvey Weinstein actually marched in the Women's March.
Oh,
and
yeah.
have been,
and I think Schneiderman did as well.
Been very pro-women, pro-abortion, or they call themselves pro-choice, or all that kind of stuff. And it's just, the other day I read a list that had been put together by Victor Davis Hanson, and there's a few exceptions, but very few, almost to a person. They're all very liberal, progressive individuals, men who say they're pro-feminist, they're pro-choice, and yet they're the ones that are actually the perpetrators of a lot of this sexualized culture.
If there were a men's section in a feminist hall of fame, Weinstein and several of these other people would have been nominated to be in that men's section of the Feminist Hall of Fame. And it turns out they are some of the worst abusers out there that we can't imagine.
Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, for instance. I mean, Matt Lauer to me was like a woman's favorite. You know, he spoke to women. Today's show is probably mostly watched by women. And so, you know, and here he was behind the scenes. It's in a way, it's shocking. In a way, it's just human nature. But when you see these people exposed, and especially when all of them are, I can't even think of one on the right now.
Yeah. Well,
and some names, even Tom Brokaw's name popped up here recently.
Yes.
We don't know where that's going to go just yet, I think, because it's just allegations. Garrison Keillor.
Yes.
Always he liked to promote his liberal
Al Franken.
bona fides. Al Franken.
Now you're creating the list I read earlier in the week. And, okay, the question I have, and I'd love to get Penna's comment on this as well, why didn't these women come forward? Because there's 4 women with the Attorney General of the state of New York. Now, in some cases, they had power. The Attorney General certainly does. He could make or break you. Harvey Weinstein probably had power over an actor, and maybe Matt Lauer. But so I recognize some reasons why some did not come forward. But isn't there at least another possibility, and that is that they, on the issues, we like them, so maybe we don't want to hurt somebody who's pushing the agenda. And so if a man says, well, I'm a feminist, and I support women, and I support pay equity, and I support a women's rights, or the idea of reproductive freedom, sometimes there are people saying, don't say anything, because they're actually helping us pursue our agenda. Is that a possibility?
And donating money in many cases. Weinstein would have the money to be able to support some of those.
Well, even when Bill Clinton was in office, I mean, I think people looked the other way because they saw that their pet causes, their feminist causes, were supported by him and certainly his wife Hillary, and so in a sense they looked the other way. And, we live in a fallen world, and so we do have to overlook people's sins. But I think when the sin reaches critical mass and when it's so hurtful to people, that's when you, and when somebody's courageous and finally speaks up, then you get another roller coaster going the other way. You get critical mass. And that's what's happened with the Me Too movement. It's good in many ways. I think it's really good that some of these people like Mr. Schneiderman, who probably would have run for governor of New York and probably been elected. It's good.
And how about the previous attorney general?
Well, yeah, Elliot Spitzer before him. I mean, think of the other New York politicians. Anthony Weiner, the husband of Hillary's top assistant, Uma Abedin.
And they keep trying to revive them. Remember, Elliot Spitzer got a spot on CNN trying to do a talk show for a while, and it was a complete flop.
Yeah, with Kathleen Parker.
They canceled it.
Well, let me just say that there are some really good pieces. First of all, of course, Penna Dexter's piece, the Me Too is a mixed bag. And if I can add to that, I think Heather McDonald's piece that's in the Imprimis, a lot of people get the Imprimis newsletter from Hillsdale. Those two are really great resources, just in terms of how there's another concern. Buddy, I'd like to hear your comments, because some have said, will the Me Too movement go too far? Because you occasionally do have somebody who is falsely accused.
Right.
And the best example I use time and time again, because it's well verified, is Tucker Carlson. There was a woman who apparently just had in her mind that he had abused her, and it's doubtful that they had ever even met each other. And he had a heck of a time, and that's being generous, a difficult time trying to tamp it down and prevent that from derailing his career, when there was no evidence at all that indeed he had done anything that she was alleging to individuals.
And this is the thing I think we have to be very careful about, because we've moved into a situation now where somebody can make an allegation and it's almost assumed to be true if they've made the allegation. In fact, Hillary Clinton used to go around and say, if a female makes an allegation against a man, you should believe her. The default mechanism is to believe the female. And then at that particular thing, somebody asked, well, what about your own husband? Well, unless you've proven they're false. But they were never proven to be false.
Well, yeah. And, one of these situations, I put this one in my piece because it's sort of a famous one. But a lot of times, because we live in this sexualized culture where it's, most people in the country probably are okay with having sex on the first date or an early date. I mean, it's just, it's stupid, this culture that we live in, but that's where we live. And so now women can, sort of retroactively look back at the date and say he forced himself on me, and it's only a he said, she said situation. So that one story about the comedian Aziz Ansari, it became famous. And this woman consented at first, and then she decided it wasn't for her, and he just took her home then, but she came back then with the accusations, and it kind of turned on her this time, but doesn't always. And so that's where I say that the Me Too movement is a mixed bag, because a lot of the feminist movement, I think, has given women this victimized mentality. They're victims. And so they play it up in their minds, even though they were consensual to at least part of it.
And it goes back to the wisdom of Mike Pence saying, I will only go out to dinner with my wife, who he got ridiculed for doing that. But when you do that, you sort of tap down any of these sort of accusations and and suspicions that go around.
Well, again, Heather McDonald's piece is one that I thought was so good that I'd like to get her on and like to have Penna co-host that. Matter of fact, I'll sit back and let these two smart women talk to each other for a while, because, again, that could be used to advance the feminist agenda. So we'll talk about that as well. So anyway, just another piece in the news. We mentioned it earlier in the week, but again, if you don't have the Me Too magazine, you can get a copy of it. Of course, we send these to those of you that are donors. So if you would want to donate to Point of View, you would certainly benefit from some of the great writing that is coming out. We'll talk about a border wall, which is being reconstructed in San Diego right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The Internal Revenue Service allows ministers and other religious leaders to take a housing allowance exemption, but that has now been threatened by a ruling by a federal district court judge. Her decision is currently on hold and has been appealed to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. The Alliance Defending Freedom brief argues that the housing allowance provided to ministers does not transfer public monies to ministers or houses of worship, and nor does it result in any administrative or financial relationship between the government and religion. Therefore, it is a permissible accommodation of religion and is consistent with this country's practice of exempting churches and other religious organizations from government-imposed tax burdens. It is worth noting that the housing allowance exemption actually predates the IRS code. Originally, it was provided for employees who had to live in a particular location in order to do their jobs, people like ranch hands, innkeepers, and military personnel. Hiram Sasser of First Liberty Institute asked, why would anyone ban rabbis, imams, pastors, and other religious leaders from a decades-old housing exemption simply because they're religious? Ken Kuklowski, also of First Liberty, reminds us that the parsonage exemption mirrors other housing allowances for teachers, first responders, and military personnel who must live in the community they serve. Many pastors already pay both the employee and employer taxes on Social Security and Medicare on their housing allowance. Removing the housing allowance without considering the self-employment tax issue would put ministers at a disadvantage in their tax burden. The IRS code, therefore, is a permissible accommodation of religion because it lifts the governmentally imposed tax burdens on ministers and other religious leaders. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Although I know a lot of you like to, especially on the Friday weekend edition, just sit back and listen. And when you have Penna, Dexter, and Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, well, there's a lot to talk about and a lot to simply listen to. The first article I've posted here today is something that I think you might find very helpful, and I entitled it The Border Wall Strategy. It actually appeared in the stream. It asks a very fundamental question. Is the President Trump border wall an outdated, ineffective strategy? And it acknowledges that you've had people like especially the Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer saying a wall can be tunneled under. I'm sure those who love the wall have heard of shovels. It's a medieval solution for a modern problem. Others have said it's a wasted resource. Some have said, well, it doesn't matter how tall the wall is. You can just buy a ladder that's higher. But this article goes on for some detail, Penna, to talk about how other countries have either built a wall, fortified a wall, or expanded border barriers of some sort since 2010. It's a very long list. And as a result, as a reminder that the walls actually do work. And if you have been to the border where there is a wall, or if you've been to Israel and seen the wall there, or I've been to Hungary and are aware of the fact that the president there built a wall because of migrants crossing, those walls actually tend to be very effective.
Yeah, when different leaders talk about ways to get around walls and that they don't keep every single person out, nobody expects them to keep every person out, but they really do. They redirect traffic, number one. so that you can then secure certain places and find out who's coming into your country. And they're a deterrent for people even trying to come. And yeah, I've been to Israel. I mean, they post guards at a lot of these places, and you can use military or you can use border patrol. It certainly is going to stop the flow, or it would barely be a trickle. And then you can go on to do other things that people are asking for, or that everybody's fighting over, election cycle after election cycle after election cycle, about immigration reform. We shouldn't do really any of it, or barely any of it, until we have the wall and stop the flow.
Again, 1,960 miles. Dr. Merrill Matthews, we're not going to cover all that wall.
We're not going to cover it all. Some of it's almost impossible because of the hills and so forth. It'd be very difficult.
But you can have various kinds of drones that can be used. And I've been to Israel where sometimes they don't even use drones. They just actually make sure that there's a thin dirt wall, and they can see if there's any footprints there to see if anybody's tried to come across. So there are all sorts of advanced technologies, simple technologies. But it does seem to me that if we are going to come up with some solutions for immigration, one of the most obvious ones is to have some kind of secure borders, don't you think?
Yes, and I think that's, from the Republican standpoint, they feel like they can't really vote on immigration reform until they secure the border. And I think Donald Trump has said essentially the same thing. First, secure the border, then let's talk about an immigration reform program.
Let's take some phone calls along the way. I've not done a good job of getting to your calls, so I'll take one along the way, and then we'll get to some of the others. 1-800-351-1212. South Carolina. Jim, what's your comment for us today?
I have a comment about the effectiveness of a wall. It's no stronger than the weakest point in the wall, but the complete wall is very effective. Look at the Great Wall of China. It seemed to have worked. It's very impressive. I've walked on it, and I wouldn't want to try to climb it or go under it. And I don't think it was possible, even back then, to do that. So, yes, I think a wall is effective.
Well, I think so. One of the things I would say for people watching it online is I've been to Hungary, and of course the problem with the president is there are people coming through Hungary on their way to Germany.
Right.
And so taking a cue from, at that time, candidate Donald Trump, the president of Hungary, put up a wall, and I'll hold this up, and you can see something very interesting. It's jumping around here, the number of migrants coming into Hungary, put up the wall, it's a flat line right after that. I mean, that one, pretty effective. Or, of course, we can talk about the number of Israeli citizens killed by Palestinians after they put up a wall. You can see the shootings there. Now, and again, you still see some killings down there. But the reality is, as you said just a minute ago, Penna, it's not perfect, but it redirects traffic. And it isn't impossible to climb a wall or to scale a wall, but it makes it a lot more difficult. And in some respects, it's just the deterrent. If I am going to go all the way through the Sonora Desert and then know I'm going to have to get over a wall and there are going to be Border Patrol on the other side, that's going to keep me from wanting to do that in the first place, don't you think?
Well, yes, especially when you think about the criminals that are coming in from our southern border. And, if you're a criminal, if you have a record, if you're smuggling drugs or whatever, you're going to be concerned about running into somebody from law enforcement on your way in.
What about the other issue? We, in this article, talk about 1 million people that come here legally, and then you have a lot of people that visit, but about 300,000 overstay their visas. So about 40% of the immigration problem is not the wall. People overstay in their visa. I know you've talked to some people in immigration that have some other ideas, Dr. Merrill Matthews.
Yes, a friend of mine is an immigration attorney, and he proposed, he's sort of a libertarian in nature, so he doesn't really think the government can do this very well, but he's proposed having people who are coming here on a visa buy a bond, just as somebody who's in jail and they get a bond to get out. So that bond means that a company is putting up money for that, and if that person does not show up when their visa expires, then the bond company goes and looks for that person and brings them back because they don't want to have to lose the $25,000 or $50,000 that it cost them to do it. So it's a private sector way to try to make sure you can keep track of these people. Some people just overstay. Others are doing that intentionally. They come here for a visa with the full intention of just overstaying because we don't track them after that happens. We have trouble finding them.
So again, one is a private sector solution, another one's a public sector solution, like E-Verify, something like that. But
right, E-Verify, and they're looking for various types of ways to be able to keep a better track of them.
Yeah, E-Verify, some people have complained that it's not that effective, but we could improve it.
Yeah.
We've improved other things before, and we could certainly do that. So it's I think it's been a lack of will on both sides. It's a political issue, and everybody can use it to demagogue. And so, maybe through the election we won't get anything, although they're talking about a couple of bills right now. But I don't know if the Congress will really vote on them before the election. We'll see. But afterwards, they really need to get serious. And by then, maybe some of this wall will be built.
And again, the parts that are being built right now are those where they're sort of refurbishing it. As I understand it, the $1.3 trillion spending bill really prevented from building any new walls, but it was intriguing. And for our listeners in California, I thought I might just point out that the first place where that wall is being rebuilt is actually in the San Diego area. Mm-hmm. The county supervisors, interestingly enough, I think have had enough of this, and so they've actually said that they would join with the president in challenging California as a sanctuary state. Mm-hmm. So in San Diego, there are people that are thinking a little differently than the people in Sacramento. You lived in California. You know how far away San Diego is from California. San Diego is actually further east than Nevada in a lot of places, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a long way from Sacramento, and in a lot of cases, when you have to live with the problem, your politics change. I mean, I know this one lady who lives in Arizona near the border, and her family owns land, and she knows all the landowners there. And the stories that she tells about the things that they find on the land and the threats to people actually living in their ranch homes along the border there. I mean, this is real life, and this is not feeling safe in your daily life. And so, I'm not surprised at all that the people in that area of California, way down south, south of San Diego, are actually electing people who are welcoming this.
One thing Penna mentioned is they need to get serious about it, but as we know who deal with this often, there are sometimes issues that Congress needs to get serious with, but they don't because they're huge fundraisers for them. And so they talk like they want to get something done, but they want to keep the money coming in, so they never actually get anything done because it energizes the base and brings in money.
Well, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll take a break, but when we come back, we might take some phone calls on the subject of immigration. But let me first of all mention that this article, Penna, 8 pages of great material put together by 2 individuals. And if you find yourself sometimes engaged in a discussion about whether we should build a wall, and people say, well, that's just old-fashioned, it doesn't work, it's a medieval solution, people will just get a ladder that's taller than the wall. First of all, they haven't seen some of the walls they're putting up right now, and those kinds of things. This is 8 pages of great material. First article. Second one, of course, is on the Iran deal, and we'll get into some of the other conversations as well, including Penna Dexter's commentary today. So we've got a lot more to cover in this last half hour, but we'll take some of your phone calls if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. for listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Merrill Matthews with us, and we'll take some of those phone calls. Talked about this particular article on the wall and some of the studies done on that. But again, some of you may have an agreement or disagreement. That is certainly why we have the program, Point of View. So let's give a few of you a chance to comment on those. Let's go, first of all, to California, KYCC. And Mary, thank you for joining us today.
Hi. I was just calling because I listened to your program, and earlier in your program, right before we went to break, you were talking about the people of Sacramento. And I would like to make it clear for the nation that it's not the people of Sacramento. It's the government in Sacramento.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, sure.
That's who I meant.
Sure.
I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, but yeah, I meant the guys making the decisions.
Yeah, because, you know, we put up with a lot. We're putting up with taxes that we didn't even get to vote for. And I'm married to a carpenter, and we would love to be able to not have the competition of under-the-table pay.
I bet
you know what I mean?
So you live in Sacramento?
Yes.
Well, we weren't attacking.
Yeah.
We're just using that as, you know, we sometimes talk about Albany, New York, or Tallahassee, Florida.
Austin, Texas.
Yeah, Austin, Texas, Sacramento. But we understand that, and I appreciate you bringing that up because back to the point you're making, and that is it's very difficult for you to compete because you are paying your laborers, no doubt, a living wage, and there's certainly various regulations that you're abiding by, and then people are undercutting you sometimes because they aren't doing the kinds of things that you're supposed to do. Is that fair?
Definitely. But it's really crucial that when you're speaking of a place, you don't blanket it, because we went to another state for a while and got really reamed by the people because where we were from, that's what their assumptions were.
Yeah.
Their assumptions were that we were like the government.
Yeah, Kerby and I know that because we're both from California.
Yeah, good point. Okay, we'll be careful. And let's see if we can take a
Thanks
few
for
more
the
phone
reminder.
callers. Larry, I understand that you do business in Tijuana, so I'd love to get your perspective. Larry also calling from California.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that throws me off is that we have a business where we cross the border in Tijuana and also in Brownsville, Texas. And on any given day on those two areas coming back, should we decide to walk back, we can walk through a USA lane relatively quick. But next to us are 5 or 6 lanes of Mexican citizens who are trying to get into the country. And it can be on any given day, if somebody would just go down there and take a look, you would see 1,000 or 2,000 every single day just trying to come into this country and get this opportunity. And so they're all coming in legally. They're all coming in with a passport. They're all coming in with a visa. They're all coming in here just to get a chance at a better life, whether they're coming from Mexico or Central America. But the thought of building a wall to keep the couple of, you know, the small percentage out is a total waste of money. And if we would just take that money and maybe send something up at the border cities that's a little more formal, so when they come in, you know, we help them a little bit and we get a little bit more documentation because we know they're not going back, and we shouldn't think they have to go back. But I think we've got this attitude that everybody's sneaking over a wall, under a wall, or through a tunnel, when in fact I bet on any given day there's at least 5, 6, 7,000 that are just walking through here legally who just decide not to go back. So let's take the wall money and let's do something to actually help them because, you know, they're fellow citizens. They just want a chance to a better life, and they're not taking anybody's jobs away in America. They're willing to take the jobs nobody else wants to do, you know?
Again, one of the things I did mention a minute ago, and I think the percentage is about 40% of the people that are here illegally probably have overstayed their visas. So I'm the first to admit that the wall is only one part of that. But a lot of the reason I wanted to post that is because it's one of the best articles I've seen. It goes on, like I said, for 8 pages. If you find yourself having people saying, well, the wall doesn't work, well, just tell people that are in places like San Diego where it does. Matter of fact, if there wasn't a wall, all that caravan that came from Central America and stopped in Tijuana, I think it would have just kept going, wouldn't it?
But Larry's point is he's talking about we need to get to an immigration reform where people can come and there's jobs here, employers want to sponsor
better
somebody
offices,
or something.
Yeah,
you know, I have a friend. He runs a yard maintenance service. His last name is Irish, and but he told me the other day. He said I do this through the proper channels. I have to advertise. He put in, I think he spent $750 for 2 ads to see if an American would do the job. No American took it, and so he finally was able to go through the process, but he had to spend a lot of money. He pays them, I think he said, about $10 or $11 an hour, but he brought up people who were willing to do work that Americans aren't really wanting to do. But he goes through the process to do that. And I would argue you need a more robust process that allows people to come in fairly easy, go back to home if they want to for Christmas or other things. They do that. They do that in some cases. But so that you can meet the employment needs that we have, especially in a very low unemployment time, but you're doing it all through a legal process.
It makes sense. And again, the point that Larry's making is lots of times won't do those jobs. You know, I've laid gas pipes in California and the heat. I've certainly put on some shingles on roofs in Texas. Do not recommend that. I've been a janitor. I've worked in a machine shop. Some of these places, you know, you can't find the typical graduate from high school willing to go and take on those jobs, and especially some of those work out in the field and some of the areas in landscaping. I understand that. So,
and construction, that's a big one. Mary sort of hinted at that. Her husband's a carpenter. Yeah. Somebody might come and do something under the table. So there are several tough industries jobs that they go to, and we're having trouble building houses now because they can't find the workers.
Very true.
But rather than say that precludes a wall or that points to not needing a wall, I think all of this points to the need for a wall, because then you stop the people that are coming in without any documentation, that are sneaking in. You stop that. You stop the criminal element. And then we become a merit-based, and that's what should be our goal, a merit-based system of immigration. We can increase and make it easier to come in here and become a citizen. We make it very difficult and to have legal immigration into the country. We improve that system and our visa system, and we learn to track people better. We learn to verify better. But we have to find out who benefits us. People should come into this country. I mean, she made Larry made the argument that these people are coming in because they need a job, but that's the only reason they're coming. That's true, but that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to our country to allow people in here who we need. Our responsibility is not to bring people in so they can begin to depend on our welfare system. So yes, we need immigration reform in many, many areas. But the wall is the first part, is the first step. We need that. It's not that we don't need a wall. We absolutely need a wall. None of these other reforms will really work well unless we have one.
That article in the Wall Street Journal, one more immigration try. We know it's not going to happen. And part of it's back to what Merrill Matthews was saying, because you were talking about the fact that some of the major donors may actually hold the strings, and as a result, somebody might say, I really want immigration reform, when the reality is, I'm not going to do anything to try to bring about any kind of real reform.
This is something that energizes the base for both parties, and passing immigration reform actually sort of neuters that, and I think you would find some who say, I just as soon not, I'll say I want it, but I'll just as soon not actually see it happen.
Let's take at least one more phone call before we take a break. We'll go to Georgia this time. John, what is your comment today here on Point of View?
Yes, hi, Kerby. I just wanted to mention that I keep hearing people talking about how expensive this wall is going to be. But, you know, if you look at, say, $30 billion for a wall, 10 years to build it, that's $3 billion a year. 300 million people in the United States, it works out about $10 a person. And so you're talking about a pair of flip-flops. So, it kind of depends on your perspective on this thing. Is it really expensive, or did you just not want it in the first place?
Pair of flip-flops. I love that one. Yeah, you win the award for one of the best illustrations. I never even thought about it that way. We need to take a break, but thank you, John. Just, again, one more piece to this conversation. We come back. First of all, those of you listening online will hear Penna Dexter's commentary. While we've been talking about California, there's this piece of legislation making its way through the legislature there, already been considered in the California Assembly. And I think it's a preview of not only what could happen in California, but other places. And so you've written a commentary on it. I want to hear about that. And we've got a couple other pieces here that we've posted. Time for Facebook to get serious about tackling anti-conservative bias. Democrats' war on capitalism, which is an interesting piece by Larry Elder. So lots of material available for you today here on the Point of View website. Take the time to visit that website. And as we mentioned in the last hour when we had Courtney Balaker with us, that new movie, Little Pink House, coming out to a theater near you, and I hope that you'll watch it as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
A book banning law has passed the lower chamber of the California legislature. The bill bans more than books. It bans anything that an individual might purchase that expresses Christian Orthodox beliefs about how a person should deal with sexual orientation or gender identity issues. The proposed law treats honest endeavors to alter same-sex attractions as criminal violations of the state's Consumer Fraud Act. California Assembly Bill 2943, now working its way through the California Senate, adds sexual orientation change efforts to a list of banned practices. These include, quote, efforts to change behaviors or gender expressions, or to eliminate or reduce sexual romantic attractions or feelings toward individuals of the same sex. A payment for products or activities that communicate the biblical position about homosexual behavior would trigger this law. It covers counseling services where the counselor is paid, church conferences where a fee is charged, books and other publications available for purchase, and college or other courses where tuition is paid. The bill could punish religious colleges whose codes of conduct require students to behave according to biblical values about sexuality. The law could punish any entity selling materials or offering teaching or counseling for a fee that presents homosexual practice or transgender identity as wrong or sinful. California loves to pass LGBT-friendly laws that limit the rights of everyone else. But AB 2943 does not protect the rights of LGBT persons. It deprives them of information. Monica Burke wrote in the Daily Signal that the proposed law only limits the number of perspectives and assistance they have access to, while setting a dangerous Orwellian precedent for government-mandated censorship. The LGBT left is pushing this bill that would ban a book or a conference speech that could help a person struggling with same-sex attraction learn how to live a chaste life. It seems this movement that once asked for freedom can't stand it anymore. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Merrill Matthews, Penna Dexter with us, and if you listen to this broadcast online, you probably heard her commentary. This bill before the California Assembly, which is passed, Assembly Bill, was it 2943, actually is something dealing with the issue of sexual orientation. But Penna, in your commentary, you said it almost ends up being a book banning bill. Explain, if you might.
It does, because, the homosexual or the LGBT left was asking for tolerance at one time. Now they're asking, they're the most intolerant of all, because if you do not agree that it's fine to have same-sex attractions, it's fine to act on them, it's fine to have gender dysphoria and act on it. If you don't agree with that and you want to change, you want some help in perhaps changing your sexual orientation, not sinning before God in that area of your life, there are people that can help you. There are counselors, there are books, there are conferences, but California wants to ban all those. Anything that where money would change hands, for instance, the purchase of a book, attendance at a conference where you pay a fee, they want to ban that with regard, and so that's what the bill is. It's already passed the House in California. It's called the Assembly Bill 2943. It's now working its way through the California Senate. And because of the composition of the legislature in California, it's not going to surprise me if it passes. And so a lot of people are talking about this, and the Christians and conservatives in California are rising up because it's really an anti-freedom of speech, anti-First Amendment bill in a sense, but it's going after businesses in this case.
One of the things I talked about earlier in the week is how sometimes you get this information that suggests that, well, that's really not a big issue, because I've said sometimes we need the fact checkers to be fact checked. And my May 10th one, because Snopes said, well, this isn't going to ban any kind of Bibles or religious stuff because it doesn't mention the Bible, Christianity, or religion at all. But Robert Gagnon in the Federalist said, well, no, yeah, surely it would be impossible in California to ban the Bible. That's not what's going to happen. But citations of Bible verses in the context of declaring homosexual practice or transgenderism to be morally questionable could be. So on the one hand, you have people saying, no, it's not going to have that kind of impact. Yet you look at the authors and the potential, and it's a really dangerous piece of legislation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I pointed out in my commentary 4 areas that it would definitely ban. Counseling services where the counselor is paid. Church conferences where a fee is charged, where they talk about this issue. Books and other publications available for purchase about this issue. And college or other courses where tuition is paid. Christian colleges, and there are a lot of them in California. And then the other part would be like religious colleges who you pay to go there. They have a code of conduct that says you live according to biblical values sexually. You don't have same-sex relationships going on. We're not going to have transgender bathrooms and all that. They could be sued under this bill. And what this bill does provide for is that the ability to sue these organizations. So, I mean, I think it's draconian, and it really has to be stopped.
Let me again mention that if you don't already receive our Viewpoints commentary, my one on May 10th dealt with the question about whether or not this was really that big of an issue. And so it's kind of how the fact checkers need to be fact checked. And then let me just mention that Penna Dexter's commentary we actually send out tomorrow. So you can receive my commentary in your inbox Monday through Friday. You can receive Penna's on Saturday. And as you go to the website of pointofview.net, you can sign up to receive that. I want to get into some other topics, but at least have 1 or 2 leftover calls here on immigration. So let's go to Arizona. Sue, can you give us a testimony on immigration?
Please. My father immigrated from England through Canada in 1959, and we had to prove that we were going to be productive citizens. And my father was an aeronautical engineer. And so that's one thing. Now, in the town where I live, and I live near the border, there's a woman here that I know personally, and she brags how she's illegal, and her sister came here before her. She buys and sells on the Internet. And so, I have a hard time. I fight resentment because, where's our country gone to? Why is it so different now? When we had to prove ourselves, why do people just come in? And you had somebody earlier in the program said, don't build a wall, spend the money elsewhere. And I could not disagree more. Please build the wall and let's get people in here who will make America better and not come in and sponge off the systems.
Let me come back to something you mentioned, Dr. Merrill Matthews, because there was a time in which if you came to this country, you had to have a sponsor or you had to show that you were financially supportive. And if you go to certain other countries in the world, you have to demonstrate that as well. And so whether it's to demonstrate that you can support yourself, or maybe you get a sponsor through a church or a family, or whether, as you said, if you're coming here on a visa, I like the bond idea, because that would all of a sudden put a tremendous amount of incentive in the part of those individuals issuing the bond to make sure that they could find those individuals that just sort of scatter and then end up being in the black market for a long time and live in the shadows.
And present them to the authorities. So, or otherwise they lose the money. So yes, it's a private sector solution which could address that problem. And as we said, some people may overstay their visas for various reasons.
Right.
Beyond maybe they're sick or something of that nature. They're going to school and they just haven't got around to it. But in many cases, it's actually a ruse to get a visa and overstay it just so you can get here.
Yes. Well, again, one of the other issues that we've posted here, one other one I thought I'd just mention real quickly, Larry Elder, it's been a while since we've had him on the program, but this was a piece that was kind of interesting. Democrats' war on capitalism. And the thing that got me smiling is Hillary Clinton has another reason why she lost the election. She said, when you're in the Iowa caucuses and 41% of Democrats are socialists or self-described socialists, and then I'm asked, are you a capitalist? I say yes, but with appropriate regulation or appropriate accountability, which I guess is saying, well, maybe I'm not a capitalist. But anyway, she thinks another reason she lost was because she was a capitalist. Okay, we can smile at that because I think there's some other reasons why she lost. Not that one.
She's got more reasons for losing than she had votes.
But the bigger issue is, Penna, I want to get your comment, and Dr. Merrill Matthews as well. The Democratic Party seems to be really doubling down on some of these issues, whether it's single payer or whether it's jobs for everyone, or even this issue that socialism is better than capitalism. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. In this piece, sorry, interrupted. In this piece, Larry Elder points out the different people in the leaders in the Democrat Party that have talked about that the real goal of Obamacare, they couldn't propose it right there at the beginning, was single-payer health care. You had Harry Reid saying that. You had Howard Dean, who was chairman of the Democrat National Committee, saying that. You had Barack Obama saying that. They couldn't get that, so they decided to ruin our insurance system instead.
Well, again, on capitalism, socialism, I mentioned that our latest article, our booklet that's coming out is Capitalism and Socialism, because I just think this is going to be a big issue in the campaign, don't you think?
It's going to be a big issue. The Democratic base is moving to the left, and you're going to have to be on the left if you want to, far left, if you're going to get the Democratic nomination. On the other hand, the Republican base is moving to the right, or has been for the past few years, so it's creating even a broader difference between them.
Yes.
But middle America Democrats, I don't know if they are that far left.
No, I don't think so at all.
And I think a lot of our listeners that are Democrats are saying, what's happening in the leadership here? This is not the party that I joined, and so we'll see how that plays itself out.
Even Alan Dershowitz says that.
I have quoted Alan Dershowitz this week because it's amazing how he sometimes says, where are my fellow liberals here that would be upset about going into the office of a lawyer and all the other things that have been happening?
Absolutely.
It's amazing. We're out of time before we're out of topics, but don't forget that next week we have Mac Lucado in studio, and even next Friday I think Alan West is going to be sitting in this chair. I know Buddy Matthews will be sitting in a week from Monday, so we're looking forward to that as well. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for